Hey there, it's Rod Yates here. Thanks for joining me on another episode of Humans of Music, a Jaxsta podcast. Each episode I talk to a music creator or industry professional about their life and career, the ups and downs of their journey, and the lessons they've learned along the way. And my special guest today is solo artist and Nine Inch Nails and Angels and Airwaves multi-instrumentalist, Ilan Rubin. Ilan has established himself as one of the top session musicians in the world, playing with artists such as Paramore, Beck, and Angels and Airwaves, the project founded by former Blink-182 guitarist-vocalist Tom DeLonge. On top of all that, in 2020, Illan became the youngest person ever to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for his work with Nine Inch Nails. It's testament to the drive and talent of a man who started playing drums as a young child, and by 11 had already played the Warped Tour and the 1999 Woodstock Festival with the band FON. But Illan plays more than just drums. As a solo artist, he plays every instrument as well as singing. In the months since we did this interview, Illan has released a new solo single under his own name called Talk Talk Talk. But prior to that, he released his solo material under the name The New Regime. And we started our conversation by talking about The New Regime's 2020 album Heart, Mind, Body and Soul, which Illan never really got a chance to tour thanks to the pandemic.
Obviously, this was an unforeseen circumstance, but anytime I think about Heart, Mind, Body, and Soul, there's a bit of a pain in my heart because it came out in March of last year, just before the pandemic really spread and the world shut down, and I was actually on tour at the time. And the tour got shut down halfway through, and I had to drive home, and that was that. And life has not returned to normal since, and it's been a bit over a year. But being the type of person who likes to keep busy, productive, moving forward, whatever you want to call it, I just feel like at this point in time, it came out. I think it's great. I'm very happy with the final result. I wish it did not come out when it did, but what can you do? So I felt like my time would be better spent just working on more music, which I'm sure that's the way every single musician felt, at least within a month or two of the pandemic, in realizing that this wasn't something that was going to be over within a matter of months. Thought, okay, well, we can't play. What's the inevitable idea? Write more music. And of course, I have been writing a lot more music, but it's such an unfortunate timeline.
Sure.
It feels like a waste, but what can you do? I mean, the music is there for those who want to listen to it, and they should, because I stand behind it firmly.
Has writing new music eased that pain that you just mentioned, the pain in your heart when you think of that record?
To a degree, but I guess the pain that has been there, and I don't want this to sound melodramatic by any means, because, hey, things are pretty good. But with anybody writing, recording, and releasing music, the ambition, or the goal, I should say, is for the most amount of people to listen to it as possible. And while this may be perceived as a good thing, and it is, I always feel like my base of fans, or whoever actually hears the music, loves it, appreciates the growth and the evolution that has taken place over years. But I haven't felt like it's reached a whole new base of people who have never heard of me before. And it's almost the greatest compliment when I get people who love the music and have no idea that I'm a drummer, or that I play in Nine Inch Nails or Angels and Airwaves or whatever it may be, because the music is then being based on the music itself. And although I find it very complimentary when somebody says, hey, I'm an Angels and Airwaves fan and I found your solo project and I love it, that's great. But there's almost a double-edged sword there, because when people listen to you, or when people have discovered you based on something else, it means that they like that other thing. And quite frankly, while you may find bits and pieces that could be vaguely reminiscent, The New Regime doesn't sound like Nine Inch Nails, or it doesn't sound like Angels and Airwaves, and for that matter, it doesn't sound like anybody I've ever played drums for. So there's a sort of potential bias, either for or against, because it's very quick to see, oh, this doesn't sound like what I thought it would. But when you find somebody who has discovered you without any of those other connections,
Right.
there's just that very pure taking in music for music's sake.
Yeah. And you mentioned it's great. It's quite flattering when people don't realize that you're actually a drummer because they see you singing and playing guitar in the new regime. But drumming
Exactly.
is something that you learned very young, from about the
Mhm.
age of 7 or 8. And then you kind of systematically moved through the other instruments. You became very good at bass. You became very good at guitar. Then you became very good at piano. There's some cello in there further down the track as
Uh,
well. Then you
yeah.
became good at singing, to the point where
Mm.
the new regime is you. You play everything and you write everything. And who instilled that drive in you, that work ethic to really apply yourself to each instrument and not just stop at one and go, I'm a good drummer now. That'll do.
Well, I mean, first things first, it's been invaluable and priceless to have such supportive parents. I mean, really, my musical journey was pushed forward by them, not in the sense of ever forcing me to do anything, but recognizing that I had a talent early on and really helping cultivate that and get me to my next steps in life. And in hindsight, there's been a very kind of linear trajectory of one thing leading to the next and leading to the next. And while in the moment, these things may not have seemed like giant steps forward, the line has obviously had a very nice sort of even slope upward, which in hindsight is great and comforting. But I suppose the work ethic or the kind of the drive to keep pursuing more and more would come from my dad, because my dad is the musician of the family. And I mean, if he were to hear me say that, he'd be like, I don't really play music anymore. But he was the one who that's where music came from in the family. I mean, as a junior high and high school kid, he was a drummer. He was going to concerts every weekend, watching my idols, who I wish I could have seen in their day.
Like who?
I've been very fortunate to have been one of the few 20,000 to watch the Led Zeppelin reunion at the O2 in '07. But I mean, he saw that in 1969. It's like, oh my God. And for him, it wasn't, these are the legends of 50 years ago. It was, hey, Cream's playing this weekend, or
Right.
Hendrix is playing, or hey, they're both playing. That kind of thing, where I can't even fathom having such a nonchalant exposure to such greatness, and bands that, I mean, Led Zeppelin being one of them, always being my favorites. I mean, I can't get through a conversation about music without mentioning them. But in terms of things that I never thought I'd see, I mean, that was a great example. And I actually saw the Police on their reunion tour in the same year. So '07 to me goes down as the year of two things I never thought I would ever see.
And did both bands live up to your expectations?
Yes, I mean, as best as they could. I mean, and I say that because Led Zeppelin obviously was the closest version of Led Zeppelin that you could get at that time,
Sure.
or ever. At least there was shared DNA behind the drums, but that it's those four and that's it. So I mean, I was thrilled. It's the only time I've ever actually kind of gotten choked up watching something, because being exposed and obsessed to that band in particular from such a young age. I mean, those were my superheroes and they still are to this day. But being able to see three of them playing on stage in front of my eyes,
Yeah.
feels like what an 8-year-old would have felt like if his favorite comic book heroes were, that's how it felt to me. And I was really thinking I'd never see that was pretty incredible. And I saw Page and Plant in '98. I mean, I was 10 years old, and that was amazing. But
Yeah.
but still, there was a real sense of individuality and just the level of special for that one concert, and
Sure.
being able to go to it was amazing. But when I saw the Police, I saw them at Dodger Stadium. I recall being absolutely blown away by how good Sting's voice still was.
Mm.
I mean, like, the guy hadn't aged and his voice was just filling a stadium like I could have only imagined it would have been when the Police was in their heyday. I digress. But but yeah, I mean, my dad was a musician. The drums that I learned to play on, that I still have to this day, were his drums when he was a teenager.
Right.
And it was those drums that struck an interest in music first for my two older brothers. So it was a very sort of natural progression of my two older brothers are trying to play these things. These things are in the garage. I can play them too.
Yeah.
And I did. And my dad realized that I actually had a sense of rhythm. I wasn't just making noise. And when he kind of first taught me my first beat or my first fill, which rings very clearly in my mind as the kind of intro fill to I Am the Walrus. I remember him sitting the middle brother, Danny, and myself down and being like, okay, here's the fill. Ba-da-da-da, da-da-da. And every time I hear that song, I'm like, I recall that first drum lesson.
That's awesome.
But yeah, so it all came from there. And because he saw that talent, I think he had just this desire to make sure I fulfilled it or saw it through to its potential if I wanted to. Like I said, nothing was ever forced upon me. And there is a common story where you have young kids with talent, but they're forced to do something they don't want to do. And that, in essence, ruins their interest in it or their desire to keep moving forward. And that was never an issue with me. I loved it. And I kept moving forward, and they always supported it. And okay, this is great that you accomplished this. Congratulations, great. What's next? But it was always done in a healthy way, not in a way that was like, yeah, good for you, but what's the next thing? There was always a sort of let's take stock of the good thing that has just happened. And all right, you got it. What's next? What do you want to do next? And whether that was ingrained in me intentionally or if it was just something that I picked up, I've never been the person to be overly content with something and kind of rest on my laurels. I mean, I'll savor it for about a day, and then it's like, okay, that was yesterday's news. Let's see what's next.
Is that quite a restless way to be? Is there part of you that wishes, I wish I could appreciate this. I wish I could just sit with this for a bit longer.
Probably, but at this point in my life, I'd rather be this way. I mean, if I'm much older and I'm still not enjoying things, then perhaps that would be a problem. But
Sure.
Right now, I'd rather have the drive and look forward to what's next, because I think it's easier to sort of just sit back and go, "Yay me, that's great." Let me pat myself on the back because that's always fun. I just don't function that way, and I suppose there's always a thrill of the hunt, so that it's almost most fun kind of approaching that goal, and achieving it is what makes it actually feel good. You know,
Right.
if these were things that just happened, I mean, of course, things happening easily is great, but I haven't. They haven't really gone that way for me. It's always been a sort of slow and steady climb that I can then look back and go, "Cool, that went to plan."
Yeah, nice. And you grew up in San Diego, and I've
Mhm.
seen an interview with you where you described yourself as a shy kid. Did
Yeah.
music and being able to sit behind a drum kit to have something in front of you, do you think that helped you with that shyness, or that was appealing to you?
That wouldn't have been something I realized until much later,
Mm,
because I had the luxury of starting so young that actually just playing on stage and in front of people was a very natural thing for me. I didn't have any time to really think about it or analyze it. But you have that first show with the new regime or whatever it be, where I'm at the front of the stage singing and playing guitar. And it's one thing to play music, but then the music stops and you have to say something into a microphone. You go, wow, definitely never had to do that as a drummer. And you then find ways of becoming more comfortable and progressing. But to answer your question, it wasn't something I realized until much later. Just the comfort of being surrounded by your instrument and having something in between you and the audience. Because it's great to just hit the drums hard and be in the moment. You don't even have to look at anybody. You can close your eyes and swing your arms around and it feels great. You're not expected to have that sort of eye contact or
sure.
connection with the crowd. It's kind of like, you guys watch me do my thing, and if you want to connect with somebody, the singer's right there or the guitar player's over there or whatever it may be. And I always just naturally took to that, but I didn't realize the sort of freedom that being a drummer gave you in terms of sort of privacy and being in your own world.
Sure. And you mentioned your dad was at school. He was a drummer. What did he end up
Mhm.
doing as a career, and what did your mum do?
Well, they both work together. They both own a business together, and it has nothing to do with music, really. My understanding of it is that it has to do with, let's say, tracking, inventory management, sort of logistical stuff, whether it be the software or hardware that helps make all of that efficient and easy to do. How they got into that, I have no idea. But that's what they do. And their idea of vacation is going to watch me play somewhere. So they'll be like, hey, Nine Inch Nails is playing in Europe. I think we're going to go to Europe. But that's what they love to do. So they're either working or they're watching me play somewhere.
I was going to ask for your dad, who clearly when he was growing up probably had ambitions or dreams of being a musician. What's it like for him to stand on the side of the stage in an arena, do you think, and watch you play?
He loves it. Both my parents love it. I mean, in a sense, for them, it probably feels very fulfilling and satisfying having seen the progression of a 9-10-year-old kid who are there helping set drums up because I can't carry everything by myself or even half of it, to then seeing like, okay, now he's playing in arenas or in festivals. And it's nice to see that the work paid off. So I'm sure it's very fulfilling for them. And I also feel fulfilled performing in those scenarios in front of them, because I feel like, all right, we the right decision was made, and I'm obviously here because you allowed me to do that.
So you started, you started playing very young, but you also started playing in front of people very young. I think you were, around about 11 when you went and played some shows on the Warped Tour with FON and played Woodstock, and you were the youngest youngest person to ever play Woodstock stage when you played there in 99. And I appreciate that's a long time ago. But as your first experiences of going on the road and playing in front of crowds, what did you learn? Or can you actually process what you learned from that time?
I really don't think there was a conscious learning of anything other than it just got into my DNA. It really soaked into my pores, and being on stage became a very comfortable place for me. And playing in front of people was a very comfortable thing for me. And considering that has been my career path, that's a good thing to be comfortable with. But I would say that the biggest asset of that whole thing was starting so young and it feeling so natural from such a young age. Obviously, you learn things, whether it be, how to deal with your instrument failing you or something going wrong. I mean, that's going to happen to everybody. And fortunately, I just rolled with the punches at a very young age. I mean, you're playing drums and a cymbal falls over. That's a lesson learned right there. And I'm glad it happened when I was 9 and 10 rather than now. But what can I say? It just, especially at such a young age, everything you're doing is a learning process. And the fact that it was just so immediate and instantaneous rather than really taking any sort of analyzing is just priceless for me.
But and again, you may not be able to remember, but do you have any memories of watching other drummers, watching other bands, learning anything about professionalism? This is what it takes to do this day after day after day. Or are you just oblivious to that? You're too young.
I wouldn't say I was oblivious to it. I mean, there were opportunities to see other musicians, and obviously much older musicians who had already accomplished things, where it was great to see. I mean, really, even seeing a band just playing in front of a massive audience, that instills a sort of, I want to do that. And people are doing that, so I can do it too. That kind of thing. But in terms of professionalism, I was always instilled with professionalism, as I said, from my supportive parents. And really, what I learned most about professionalism from actually being in the trenches, so to speak, is how not to act, because I felt like I didn't deal with professionals until I was in Nine Inch Nails. And that was 12, 13 years into my sort of musical journey, at 20 years old. And I don't mean that to sound pretentious or arrogant, but musicians are an interesting breed of people. And within that breed of people, you find ones who, and this obviously can go for people outside of the musician group of people, but whether it be people taking things for granted, or people not working hard enough, or people wasting time, or people not making the most of their time, which I guess is the same thing. But I was always very irritated in the sense of not feeling like I was doing enough. And especially as a drummer, you got to think, let's say hey, it's time to record an album. The drummer's the first one in and out of the studio.
Mm-hmm.
And I would always finish my tracks in a day or two. And then it's like, okay, we'll let you know when the album's done. And then 5-6 months pass. And it's like, what have you guys been doing? And that really was my reason for starting the New Regime and for starting to sing, because I thought, I can play these instruments well. I can play better than that guy or that guy. If I just sing, I don't have to depend on anybody,
Right.
and I can do it all myself. And I'm speaking very frankly with you. I don't want this to be misconstrued as arrogance or whatever, but I mean, music has been my only true all-consuming passion in life, and those years of obsession that I dedicated to the drums, I dedicated to the guitar and the bass and the piano, as you said earlier. And it wasn't a matter of I'm okay at these things. It's like, no, I put in the time and I developed a pretty broad skill set on all of these instruments. So it was sort of a natural decision to make or idea to stumble across where it's like, wait a second, I can do all of this by myself. It's just there's one important piece to the puzzle, which is the most important piece to writing music, which is the vocals. That's the melody, those are the lyrics, and that was the final piece, in which case I forced myself to jump that hurdle and become a singer so that I could then acquire complete freedom and do whatever I wanted. And that's where the New Regime came from.
Last question about those early days.
Hit me.
You learned from Travis Barker. Travis Barker, the drummer from Blink-182. You had lessons with him when you were a kid.
I did.
How long did you study with him, and what did he teach you?
It was a pretty short window in time, but it's all the more impressive when you get the perspective of where he was at that time. Blink was already a huge band, and when I think of it, I mean, I was 11. I took lessons from him on and off from like 11 to 13 years old. So it was a 2-year window, but it wasn't 2 years of consistent lessons because, as I said, Blink was already a huge band. Boxcar Racer had formed as a side project, but I basically got lessons when he was at home and not touring, which wasn't that often. So if I were to get 3 lessons in a row, 3 weeks in a row worth of lessons, that would be shocking. But the fact that you have this guy who's already in a massive band or 2 massive bands, and he was probably, 24, 25, 26 at the time, and teaching an 11, 12, 13-year-old, it's awesome. And it was a special experience, and it was great to see what a trained musician he was. I mean, anybody who's seen him, or at this point, social media wasn't a thing back then, but everything related to what he does is playing drums. Whether it's practice pad or marching snare drum or playing, his world is drums, and he seems to have always been that way. So when I was taking lessons from him, he really kind of instilled the importance of reading to me. And although I had a teacher before him who initially taught me how to read, Travis kind of sharpened those skills, and we would spend 30 minutes on a practice pad reading snare drum charts and doing rudiments, playing together. And then we'd spend 30 minutes at the drum set. And that 30 minutes was kind of split between playing more sort of rock kind of funky stuff. There was a book called The Funky Primer. It was just beat after beat. And then another book, which is actually coincidentally behind me. I was thinking it'd be good to get into that stuff. But it was this Jim Chapin jazz book, which in terms of drum books, it's certainly one of the most famous. I mean, it's been in print since like the late 40s. But the entire lesson was reading. And yeah, so it was great to get that instilled at such a young age, and by somebody who was in such a sort of great and exciting point of their career. It was a good time.
After the break, Ilan talks about working with 9 Inch Nails and Paramore and what it was like being inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Welcome back to Humans of Music and my interview with Ilan Rubin. Fast forward a few years, you get your first big break, I guess, playing with Welsh band Lost Prophets. And you recorded a few songs on the album Liberation Transmission, which was produced by Bob Rock. What again, I'm going to ask you a lot throughout this interview what you learned from these experiences. But being in a room with someone who has, by that point, produced Metallica, Bon Jovi, Motley Crue, The Cult,
Mhm.
he's
Mhm.
about as big as they come in the producer circles. What do
Mhm.
you learn from him, and what is that like having to perform for him and live up to his standards?
Well, it wasn't difficult in the sense that whenever I'm playing, I just naturally want to do the best I can do, whether it's for a Bob Rock or whether it's for anybody. But yeah, that was the biggest step forward for me at that time. Unfortunately, that era of my life has somewhat been tainted for obvious reasons, and I kind of just always brush it under the rug at this point in time. But it was a good experience for me because it was my first time playing enormous festivals. I mean, with that band, I spent most of my time in Europe and in the UK in particular. But those were my first times really sort of traveling the world and many places I'd never been to. But as I said earlier, the linear progression, I mean, playing in Lost Prophets for that brief 2 years or whatever it was, directly led to me playing in Nine Inch Nails, in which case I'm always indebted to that period of my life for sure. Undeniably, you know.
That's because Trent saw you playing with Lost Prophets at the Reading Festival in 2007.
Exactly. I have to compliment your research. It's immaculate.
Thank
I'm
you.
not used to that, so thank you.
Right. Just, I mean, you seem to, when I asked you about performing for Bob Rock and, that being your
Mhm.
biggest break, does anything fluster you? You don't seem to get flustered by any of these things. You just go in there and you seem to have this idea, well, I'm just going to show you what I can do. Have you ever been in this situation where you've been flustered?
Um, my instinct is to say not really, and where that comes from is from always making sure I've dotted my I's and crossed my T's with whatever it is that I'm doing. I mean, if I'm going to go track a song in a studio, for example, I know that I know every beat of that song and that I've put in the time or charted it or listened to it so many times to where it is second nature. And the same thing goes if I'm going to step on stage or if I'm going to go forward with an audition, I put in the amount of effort that allows me to feel nothing but free and confident in that moment. I mean, I wouldn't say I lack confidence as an individual, but I can certainly say that I'm most confident when I'm behind the drums or when I have an instrument in my hand. That's just the way it has come to be for me. And as a result of that, it's like, okay, I'm ready to go. Let's do it.
Right.
Yeah.
And just for anyone listening who's not aware of Lost Prophets, and
Mhm.
obviously the band ended terribly with those child abuse allegations against singer Ian Watkins, and you'd left the band by that point.
Yes, for years, might I add.
For
But
years,
yes.
correct. But did it teach you anything? And again, not that incident, but the band from the outside seemed a little dysfunctional in terms of
Mm,
everyone's relationship with Ian and the singer. Did you learn
mhm.
anything from band dynamics from being in Lost Prophets, that being your first big break, and how bands operate and how you can best navigate your way through that?
I suppose so. Keeping quiet is a good way to navigate through most band dynamics because
Right.
really, I mean, and not only that, I mean, that was a six-piece band, unless I'm miscounting or misremembering, but six guys in that band.
Sure.
And that's a lot of people. Four people is enough to deal with. Three people, a duo is hard enough to deal with. So you have that many people in a band, and of course, I was always the new guy. I was by far I mean, you have a 16, 17-year-old with five Welshmen in their late 30s or whatever it may be. I mean, that's an odd dynamic. Any way you look at it,
Sure.
regardless of my affiliation or my entrance into that world. But as I said, it was a good time. I certainly had my issues with Ian. I mean, and what's ironic about it is that he was the one who actually called me to audition for the band. I mean, it's crazy because I had never heard of the band, to be completely honest with you. But it was impressive to me that in their conversations with other people, in regards to, hey, we lost our drummer and we need a new drummer. Do you know of anybody? Oh, well, there's this kid from San Diego who plays in this band. Probably haven't heard of him, but check him out. And I guess my name came up at least twice that
Mm.
I know of, but it was enough for them to actually say, okay, well, let's try and track him down and see how that goes. And I was like, whoa, this band's way bigger than anything I've ever done. That's for sure. And Wales is a lot closer to England, which is where all my idols are from. So I was like, hey, It was a no-brainer.
So 9 Inch Nails comes along.
Yes.
Trent sees you
Yes.
playing at the Reading Festival in 2007. How do things progress from there? What happens? Does he approach you? Does he approach your management? How do you come to be involved in that fold?
Look, I fortunately had a friend who is still a great friend of mine. We actually co-own a drum company together called Q Drum Co. But him and I had known each other for many, many years, and he was actually a drum tech for 9 Inch Nails. So he teched for initially Jerome Dillon, then went on to Josh Freese, and sort of every drummer. Well, I came in after Josh, but and I haven't left since. But I always thought that was the obvious sort of connection, but I found out from Trent fairly recently that he saw me play, and then he thought I was Welsh, which is hilarious to me. But he just, I suppose, my playing made an impression on him, and he thought we got to track this guy down just in case I ever need a drummer, because there have been probably one or two drummers more or less than Spinal Tap's run of drummers. I'm not sure. But
no Bizarre Gardening accents, though.
Yeah,
no,
exactly.
No combusting drummers, which is
yeah, not yet anyway. But if I go up in flames, then there you go. But I woke up one morning to an email saying, "Hello, this is Trent from 9 Inch Nails here," and I'm like, "Holy shit! Okay, yes, I'm interested." And that was that. I was like, "Tell me when, where, what I need to know," and I'm in.
Right.
And I auditioned. They were in the middle of the Lights in the Sky tour in 2008, winter of 2008, and I flew out to a sound check, played with them, and great experience.
So what? You didn't audition. You flew out, did a sound check, did the show.
Well, no. I auditioned at a sound check.
Oh, I see.
They were flying drummers in and out and doing auditions during the sound checks throughout that tour, and I'm very happy to say that after I played, that I got the job, and I've been with the band since, which was 2009, and I joined when I was 20. I'm 32 now, which is insane how quickly time flies, but it's been great.
Trent seems like someone who would be a bit of a kindred spirit with you in terms of his dedication and his focus. Is that the case?
Yes. I mean, I've said this many a time, but I can't stress enough how, given what I just said about lack of professionalism in other bands I played with, where finally stepping into my first rehearsal with 9 Inch Nails, I had this sort of sigh of relief of like, not that I expected any less, but it was just this feeling of, oh, this is the kind of band and organization that I've wanted to be a part of. It's a very no bullshit way of doing things. I mean, the bar is set high, and anything lower than the bar is a failure pretty much. And not that anybody's, like a drill sergeant or anything, but it's just expected that things need to be as good as they can possibly be. Things need to be executed. No band has rehearsed that much in regards to what I've been a part of. Any friends who I have in other bands, and these are guys who are in massive bands in their rights, but if I tell them, oh yeah, we have a month's worth of rehearsals, or we're rehearsing for 2.5 months, it's like, what? We usually get together for like 3 or 4 days and then just go and do it. But 9 Inch Nails has such a versatile and lengthy catalog that to get everything up and running for a tour, especially the sort of format for the last tour we did, which was rather than playing massive venues in each city, we would do 3 or 4 nights in theaters. But knowing that a huge amount of the concert goers would be seeing every show, if not more than one,
Mm-hmm.
Trent's great about saying, well, we need to give these guys 3 or 4 different shows. I mean, I don't want people watching the same thing 4 times in a row. That's bullshit. I'd be pissed if I did that. And as a result, once again, the bar is always set high, and what is expected is high, and I like it that way. I think it keeps things exciting, and really, he was the first person I had ever dealt with, and I give Tom a lot of credit for this too, but who saw my other skill sets beyond the drums and thought, I'm going to use that. You play the piano well, I'm going to get you on the piano. And if I need a bass player and you're not playing drums, you're going to play bass. And I don't care what you're doing, but if you can hit this high harmony too, do it. And you mentioned the cello earlier. I'm not a cellist by any means, but the only reason I have one or have ever played one is because Trent approached me and said, do you play the cello? And I told him, not yet. But what are you looking for? He's like, well, I was thinking it'd be cool to have some cello on 2 or 3 songs. If you're down, I'll get you some lessons. And I'm like, absolutely. I love a challenge. Let's go for it. And that's the only reason. I mean, fortunately, all the songs were in the same key, which I think is just a heavenly coincidence where it's like I'm practically playing the same 3-4 notes in the songs, but worked out for me.
That's it.
And it's great. But I've had other experience where people were very threatened by the idea that I could pick up their instrument and play it well, which is ridiculous. But yeah, and as a teenager, it pissed me off. And it was funny when I first got a call from Tom DeLonge in terms of joining Angels and Airwaves. I remember having a very specific conversation with him because he mentioned something about the new regime. And I told him, hey, just because I play all these other instruments and write my own songs, I don't want you to think that I'm going to come into this expecting to write and kind of put my print. He's like, no. That's why I'm looking for you. People can play drums, but like, I kind of want to shake things up a little bit and have somebody to maybe push things in slightly different directions and whatever it may be. But I remember very vividly saying, just because I do music, don't think I'm going to come in here and do music. I'll just hit drums. I'm very used to just hitting drums. But he had that same thing. He's like, wait, hey, you play guitar. You do it. Yeah. You know, you can play bass. You come up with the bass lines. And we've had a good working relationship as a result of that. And the Angels and Airwave stuff, I'd say the majority of it since I joined has been a very conscious push and pull of like him bringing an idea to the table, me trying to bring it somewhere else, him bringing it back. And then we kind of just end up in this no man's land that's still very much him. And it's got me in it, but that's the chemistry we stumbled across.
Yeah.
It's not the situation of, hey, let's both pick up a guitar and churn out some chords. That just doesn't work. And our tastes couldn't be further apart.
Right.
And for example, there's nothing sweeter to me than the sound of a beautiful minor chord, whereas a minor chord sounds wrong to him because it sounds dark. Like right. His ears are beautifully tuned to the sound of major.
Okay.
Right. And it's clearly worked for him beautifully. But we had to figure out, okay, what's the common language here? What are the common denominators in which we can use as a platform to write off of? And I think people are going to be very pleased with this new album that we have coming out.
Oh, cool.
It should be exciting.
That is exciting. I want to ask you one more question about your 9 Inch Nails days. I remember seeing 9 Inch Nails well before you joined the band. So this is back in the Downward Spiral days. And it looked like a war on stage. It just looked like the apocalypse. And I've seen them over the years since, and it's got less so. But it still must be a very physical band to be a part of on stage. What can you describe for me what it is like walking on stage and playing with 9 Inch Nails?
I mean, the most important thing is that the music itself is intense. Any way you look at it, you can't go up there and half-ass it, or else it's just not what it needs to be. So that's coming from the music. But what's interesting to me and something that I can't really wrap my head around is I've only known Trent and been involved with the band since 2009. Obviously, that's kind of almost 20 years into 9 Inch Nails. And, you know, it's no mystery or secret that he had his vices at certain points in time, whether it be that Downward Spiral era or kind of more into the fragile. But I obviously wasn't there for that.
Sure.
And whether it be stories that he's told or things that I've seen, like that kind of chaos on stage, and chaos stemming from maybe that behavior or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
I can't comprehend it because Trent has been nothing but like, I mean, he's a funny guy, don't get me wrong, but in terms of just stone cold focus and things need to be precise. And I've only just seen the intense pursuit of perfection. I haven't seen the wild guy that you're talking about. But because the intensity comes from the music, he's as intense as they come still, but it's purely from a performer's point of view.
Sure.
It's not like I've had a bit too much to drink and I'm or whatever it may be. It just comes from, this is intense music and we're giving it our all. And that's where that comes from. Of course, a guitar will fly and something will break. And that is another sort of kind of Nine Inch Nails trademark that the audience loves. And while even within my period of the band, the level of instruments breaking has really diminished over the years. I mean, when something doesn't work and that guitar goes flying or that keyboard gets kicked over, the crowd just loves it. And it's kind of it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy in a cycle of excitement. But yeah, it's intense. But as intense as the music is, it's also as mellow and atmospheric within the same set list.
Sure.
So it really is this awesome, I guess we can call it a journey. I don't want to sound pretentious here, but a lot of ground is covered.
Yeah.
I mean, you might get pummeled for the first 8 songs, but you also might be driven to sleep with like this nice sort of dark lullaby that will kind of be that valley, and then you're going to get taken to another place where you're just like, oh my God, there's so much going on, not to mention strobes and awesome production, and there's just a lot going on.
Yeah. I just want to ask you about one more album that you've been involved with, and that was Paramore's self-titled album. And I think it's interesting, and I think it's an insight into the world of a session drummer as well, to come into a situation like that where the band were trying to come to terms with the fact that 2 members had left and not so much rebuild their career, but prove that they could still have a career without the drummer and the guitar player who had left the band. So you come into the band to record that self-titled album at a really crucial period in their career. How do you navigate that? What is your job? Like, what do you, how are you of best service to them?
Well, the immediate connection that a lot of people may not have put together is that the producer of that album is a friend by the name of Justin Meldal Johnson, and he played in Nine Inch Nails when I joined the band.
Yeah.
So, obviously still grateful to him because that was a great experience for me and a great time in my life. But he knew that they needed a drummer, and we had just come off of tour together, and it was a great invitation to go in and play. But I always look at the role as a session musician as basically being a programmable machine. Not that I'm playing machine-like, but whatever they require of me or want me to do is what I do. And fortunately, they had a lot, most of their sort of drum ideas demoed out and pretty fully realized, and it was my job to bring that stuff to life. And I always pursue that first pass of things is playing exactly what they're looking for. Then they inevitably say, okay, well, how would you do this? Would you try this differently? And if there's a thing where I say, you know what, I'm actually kind of getting this idea or like the feeling like this is where the beat should kind of go, then there's like there's a slight collaboration there. I mean, like I said, the ideas were very fully realized, but there was that element of you do you. And more often than not, they would like that. And I think they enjoyed the energy and it was fun for them. And it's always difficult finding another musician that you're comfortable with and that you just gel with as players. And from the beginning, it was super smooth and it was a lot of fun. It was the first time I'd ever played with people who were my age, funny enough.
Right.
And it was a great time. It was the only time where I just wish that scheduling had allowed me to see that through. And what I mean by that is I initially was just hired to play drums on the album, but we got along so well and they were already kind of booking their next touring commitments. And they asked me what my interest was in playing live. And of course I was, and I did play live with them for maybe about a month or so, give or take.
Yeah, you came to Australia with them.
Exactly. Soundwave was a great time, but I knew that Nine Inch Nails was going to be getting back to it in a matter of months, and I couldn't commit to a cycle with them. And I remember telling them, like, I can't say what it is. Probably not going to have a hard time figuring it out. But as of like May, I'm booked, and I wish I could. And I totally understand if you guys just want to find your guy as of now because you have plenty of shows to play. And I was really surprised that their outlook was, we'll play with you as long as we have you, and we'll find somebody to take over you when you got to go. And I was really impressed with that. I was grateful for it. And I like I said, I look back to that, and it was just a great time. It was a lot of fun. And obviously, had Nine Inch Nails not been playing at that time, I'm sure I would have stuck around with them and at least done the cycle. But of course, these are great problems to have. I don't expect anyone to be playing the violin for me. But it was also great to get back to Nine Inch Nails. So
Of
Like I
course.
said, good problems, if they could even be called problems. But yeah.
Absolutely. The other thing I was interested in, though, is I guess the emotional element, which we touched on briefly, but the emotional element of walking into a band at that point in their career, where they're trying to figure out what their future is with a different lineup and how they're going to move forward beyond just playing well, because obviously that's your main aim when you go into these situations. You have to play well, but how empathetic do you have to be to each situation that you walk into? Because it must be different walking into Paramore at that point of their career to Nine Inch Nails, where you've got Trent, who is very focused and the focal point. Like, how empathetic do you have to be?
I would imagine that it really depends from one group of people to the next. And fortunately, it's been very smooth for me because I've never detected or felt like I was really walking into a sticky situation or a difficult situation, as you said, in terms of the emotional state of whatever band it was. So, with Paramore, for example, they could have been great actors. They could have been super, just generally easygoing people, or they could have been relieved that we all played as well as we did together. Because I honestly didn't detect anything like, oh, they're worried about how this is going to go.
Hmm.
Above and beyond, obviously, stepping in the studio to do your next release, you always want to make sure there is an inevitable amount of pressure to either do as well as you did last time, but obviously the hope is to top yourself and to keep doing that. And that album did very well, so I'm sure they were happy with it, but I really didn't detect any sort of band drama or as if I was stepping into a situation that was unpleasant because it was a really smooth thing. And I have no doubt that how well we played together kind of alleviated any sort of concern. And I'm sure that could be the same with anything. So when I walked into my first Nine Inch Nails rehearsal, I was as prepared as could be. And there was no sort of, I didn't give anybody a reason to worry. So if there was anything in the air that was anything less than positive, it had nothing to do with me, in which case I've done my job and that's that.
Yeah.
But yeah, fortunately everything's been pretty smooth.
Right. There's I guess the nature of being a session musician is the fact that it's quite transient. So you will do a few years with Love Prophets, you'll do a few years with, well, a little bit of time with Paramore, do the album, and then a few dates after the album. Obviously, Nine Inch Nails is the band that you've been in for some time. But, you've played with Beck, you've played with myriad other artists. What would it
Mm.
take for you just to go, I've found my home. This is it. I'm just doing this.
Well, it's really funny you say that. And I know that my career looks a certain way as if it was my intent to kind of be everywhere at once or multiple places at once, I should say. And that was really never the way I envisioned myself. I mean, as a young kid, I grew up loving bands. And I always thought, great, I would love to be the John Bonham of my band or the Stuart Copeland of whatever band and be in that one thing. But I suppose being professionally motivated and career driven, just wanting to constantly get to the next thing and the next best thing, which I know that can come across the wrong way. But if you're in a band for a few years and it's just not panning out and you get an opportunity, you'd be a fool not to take it. So that really is how my career sort of unfolded. But if you're moving from one thing to another, you kind of, or you certainly lose out on that ability to have some sort of organic one in a million combination of you and two, three other people. So although that's not how I wanted it to be, or although that is how I wanted it to be, I just never found myself in groups with other people kind of just working on music to see where it went. Because from the second I was asked to audition for one band, that turned into the next and so on and so forth. And it's odd, but what was your question exactly?
what would, what would it take you just to say, I've found my
Ah,
home now, this is it?
oh, I really don't know. I mean, honestly, I would say I was about to say it would take my solo career getting to where I want it to be. But at the same time, even if I was on top of the world with my solo career and Trent calls or Tom calls, I'd still want to do those things.
Sure.
But as a person who likes to be as busy as he can be for as long as he can be, I mean that sounds like a great thing. So I suppose that would be my indirect answer to you.
Right.
Yeah.
Throughout all those experiences that you mentioned and the fact that, one gig led to another,
Mhm.
have you had anyone along the way who, I guess, has mentored you or you've been able to lean on for advice when making decisions as to whether the next move is the right one for you, or have you just had to trust your gut?
Oh, it's pretty much been trusting my gut, but at the same time, things haven't been very difficult to navigate in terms of decision making. I mean, leave Lost Prophets to join Nine Inch Nails isn't exactly a head scratcher, and obviously that's the easiest example,
Mhm.
but other examples come from open schedules.
Right.
And for example, Angels and Airwaves was another situation that was very easy to get into for multiple reasons. One, it was a band based in San Diego. I was living in San Diego at the time. And not only that, Tom also was still in Blink. So it wasn't the sort of thing where it was like, you need to commit to this and this is all you're doing. Everyone has many avenues they're going down professionally. So it was kind of just easy to fit that in.
So Jaxsta is all about giving credit where credit is due. Are there people that you would give credit to for helping you get where you are today?
Absolutely. I mean, aside from all the, honestly, I've probably given all the credit throughout this interview. I mean, it
Sure.
all stems from my parents in particular, my entire family for sure. But anybody who's given me the opportunity to play with him, it's one thing to look back in hindsight and say this gig led to a bigger gig and then a bigger gig after that. But because I started so young, even getting the opportunity to audition for something at say 16 years old or to audition for Nine Inch Nails at 20 years old, I mean, these are seasoned pros and veterans at that point who are giving really a kid a chance. And obviously, I took that opportunity and I made the most of it. But me not being one of those top frontmen or whatever, as a 32-year-old right now, I would be extremely hesitant, being like, "Oh, this guy's 20, cool, let's give him a shot." But I'm very fortunate that people have given me that opportunity, and because of the way I was brought up, I was able to make the most of those opportunities and not squander them. So hopefully that answers your question.
It does. It does. All right, Ilan. Thank you so much for your time. It's been so great chatting with you.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
And that's it for another episode of Humans of Music. A big thanks to Ilan for his time, and thank you for listening. If you have any feedback on the show or suggestions on who you'd like me to interview, or even if you just want to say hello, please drop me a line at humansofmusic@jaxsta.com. That's humansofmusic, one word, at Jaxsta, JAXSTA.com. This episode was mixed by Lachlan Mitchell from Parliament Studios in Annandale, and the incidental music and theme song were written and performed by Sam Lockwood. Please remember to subscribe to the Humans of Music podcast so you never miss an episode, or even better, share it amongst your friends and rate and review it. And remember, next time you need to know who wrote a song, who produced a song, who engineered it, who played on it, who sang on it, who did anything on it, head to jaxsta.com for all your official music credit information. Until the next episode of Humans of Music, I'm Rod Yates. Thanks for listening.